So Fletcher and the Caterpillar is the first in our new series of seasonal adventures for Fletcher. So this is the spring story. So it's set in the wood in spring. So it's all very much sunshine after rain and sparkles, and it's very sort of lush setting in the wood. So Fletcher finds a little caterpillar under a juicy green leaf, and being Fletcher, he decides to befriend it, because Fletcher's always making friends and trying to make friends with everybody. So he introduces it to all his friends, and he introduces it to lots of games, tries to find out what Caterpillar likes to play. But Caterpillar doesn't really like playing anything. Caterpillar just likes munching. And this is why I love writing Fletcher stories, because, I mean, the story is essentially the story of the caterpillar and the butterfly life cycle. But because of Fletcher, it sort of turns into something else. So it sort of became about how you don't have to be the same as people to be friends with them, and you can like doing different things, and you can be different people, you can be from different places, but you can still be friends. So Fletcher and Caterpillar have a nice sort of springtime time together when they're just doing their own thing together and being friends. But then one day Caterpillar stops munching and Fletcher is worried. I think I should probably stop there if you don't want to give away spoilers of what happens, but I do just want to say that it has the most fabulously joyful last page, thanks to Tiphanie. I just love the last page of this book so much.
So what inspired you to write Fletcher and the Caterpillar?
There are kind of two different answers to that question, because the first one is just that I love caterpillars. I mean, caterpillars are just amazing. They're just amazing colours, amazing shapes, and what they do, the whole caterpillar life cycle is just magical. When I was a child, I've always loved nature, and I spent my childhood sort of roaming Richmond Park, and I had a bedroom full of tanks of caterpillars and snails and creepy crawlies. And particularly, I think when I was a bit older, more a teenager, I particularly collected caterpillars. I used to go out and collect caterpillars and keep them in my room and look after them and hatch them out into butterflies and moths and see what they became. So I've always just loved caterpillars and butterflies, and I actually dedicated this story to my mum and my sister, because they both got very involved in the whole caterpillar project when I was a teenager. My mum used to go out when I was sort of busy with work, and she'd go out and like find food for them and help me food foraging. So that's one side of it, is basically just loving caterpillars. And also they're just perfect for Fletcher, because, you know, that whole misunderstanding of worrying and nurturing, they sort of tick all those. You know, gave him something to worry about, something to misunderstand, something to look after, and obviously just an amazing ending. But the other answer is how the story actually came to be written is when we were doing the first seasons, the first set of 4 seasons. I think I've said in the past there was never a plan to write Fletcher's 4 seasons, but just the first 2 books that were inspired by my children happened to be about autumn and spring. And then the publisher asked for Christmas. So we had 3 seasons without really trying. So we wanted a summer story. So that was the first time I actually sat down with my little Fletcher caterpillar and thought, right, what would you get up to in the woods in the summer? And rather than coming up with 1 story, I actually came up with 3, because I was talking, my children at primary school at this point, and I was talking to the children in the playground, and we were sort of brainstorming ideas, and we came up with 3 different Fletcher stories. So one was all about the sounds in the summer wood, which ended up being Fletcher and the Summer Show. But we also came up with a seaside story, Fletcher and the Rock Pool, and a caterpillar story, Fletcher and the Caterpillar. So Fletcher and the Summer Show was the one that actually became the book. But Tiffany and I just loved the caterpillar story and the rock pool story. So we always had them in the back of our mind as wanting to do something with them. So when Graphic said, would you like to write some more stories? We already had these 2 stories poised and ready to go, really. And although they were both written for summer, actually, obviously, caterpillars are very much a springtime thing as well. So I just sort of changed it a bit to make it into a spring story rather than a summer story. But the heart of the story stayed the same.
Tiphanie, what's your favourite part of the story?
I think I really like the part here where it's, if you can see, it's when Fletcher is guarding over Caterpillar in the woods, and then Caterpillar is kind of wiggling and he's going to form his chrysalis home. And then there's this kind of waiting and worrying that Fletcher goes through. And I really like that part of the book, because it's kind of like a sort of passageway into the ending of the book. There's this sort of like anticipation and expectation, and also this moment when Fletcher doesn't know what's happening with his poor little caterpillar, and the reader doesn't, and he has to sort of live alongside this anxiety and the worry for, you know, quite a long time, you know, the endless summer days. So I feel like there's a lot of tension and sort of expectation and waiting to see what happens, and sort of emotion there, really, because he's kind of like, there's a loss and he's sort of having to live with it. but it's still kind of like there's this hope and this potential and expectation. So I really like that part of the book because it's kind of a pause and a wait and a sort of like passage into something magical that Fletcher doesn't know is going to happen and the reader doesn't know it's going to happen, but there's something going on in the quietness, in secret. So I like that part of the book.
Tell us about the caterpillar.
We were kind of thinking, there was quite a few issues actually, because at one part of the story there was like, I remember in Eric Carl's picture of the book about the very hungry caterpillar, his caterpillar makes a cocoon. And I said to Julia, I don't actually know if caterpillars make cocoons and turn into butterflies. I think they actually turn into moths from cocoons. And so we kind of had to do a bit of kind of tweaking of the text. And then, how do you make a caterpillar make a chrysalis in a kind of, aesthetic, nice way? Because actually when a caterpillar makes a chrysalis, they sort of concertina up their body and then slough off their skin, and it's a bit kind of gruesome really. We're thinking, how can I illustrate that? So in the end I decided not to illustrate it and leave it to the imagination of the reader, which is a trick of illustrators, I think, because sometimes the reader's imagination is better than anything you could illustrate. So I decided to illustrate that before he makes his chrysalis. So you've got him sort of hanging here. I'll show you the picture of him hanging there. He is looking very happy. And then all of a sudden in the next page is a chrysalis. So there was lots of toing and froing before we came to a character that we were all happy with, and sort of how lifelike should he be, because you're sort of characterizing it. You don't want to make it too lifelike, but you don't want to make it too much of a kind of cartoony character either. So but we came up with the right one in the end.
This sort of ties into what I was saying about how much more we're sort of working together this time round, whereas for the first 4 seasons it was very much, I had my story to the publishers and then, Tiffany would do the illustrations and we didn't have much contact between us, whereas this time we're very much, it's a collaboration between us. So, Tiff's getting to comment on the stories, which has actually been hugely helpful because she did pick up a few. I mean, she picked up that I mentioned I had a cozy cocoon. I had my caterpillar spinning a cozy cocoon, but actually for butterflies you have the chrysalis, not the cocoon. So it wasn't just, her thinking about the picture. I also just had to tweak the writing about it and again try and make it sound as nice as a cozy cocoon, because I love that phrase, but it wasn't right for a butterfly. And then, yes, me being involved in designing the caterpillar, that's the only character out of any of my picture books that I've actually had any say in what it looked like. So that was so much fun sort of because I sent her this photograph I'd taken of a caterpillar in my back garden again, which was the same sort of black, white and yellow colour scheme, wasn't it, a few years ago, that was just this fabulous, because I still love caterpillars. If I see caterpillars, I'm always reaching for my camera. So that was really fun, just being involved in the design of the caterpillar for the first time. And we do have much more toing and froing between us on the stories and now.
Do you have a particular illustration that you prefer?
I loved doing the illustration that you can see behind us. And I think it's because, it was the first illustration in the book, and I wouldn't normally start with the first illustration, but I was so desperate to do this kind of double page, and it's kind of like the swish of the curtain opens and we're into the next series of Fletcher. So I feel like it's really like the opening scene and bringing, Fletcher to everyone again. And it speaks of him, it's his curiosity, it's kind of him surrounded by nature and he's being a bit kind of nosy, and you can just see the little tiny tail of the caterpillar. And I really loved doing it. I love trying to create the atmosphere and the feeling that the book would inspire. So I think that's my favourite illustration. I loved doing it. I loved playing with the paints, and I was just so happy to begin again on a new Fletcher series. So I think what I try and create with my work is not necessarily something that looks like a exact likeness, but quite often I'm sort of trying to create a feeling or an atmosphere. And in this illustration there's the bluebells at the bottom, and I just remember when we lived in England we used to go for walks in bluebell woods, and there was just a real kind of magic and coolness to the woods. So I'm kind of trying to evoke an atmosphere and a feeling rather than you know, get the leaves looking exactly like leaves or the bluebells looking like bluebells. I just wanted to sort of create a feeling more than anything. So,
Julia, were there ever any ideas to introduce Fletcher's parents or brothers and sisters or siblings?
Well, his mum does crop up a bit. He has a sort of quite a hands-off mum, Fletcher. So Fletcher's mum does just pop up every now and then just to feed him little bits of information. But I think that's enough, because mostly he's off exploring on his own. It's all about just Fletcher encountering nature, basically. That's at the heart of the stories. So if he had too many people around him, and particularly too many parents, if they were telling him too much stuff and explaining everything to him, then, you know, he needs to find it out for himself mostly. So yeah, his mum sometimes has a little moment at the beginning or the end, just sort of having a little moment to fill him in, but mostly it's just about Fletcher exploring and making friends and doing his own thing.
Tiphanie, as a teacher, how would you use this book in class with children?
Well, Julia and I have been amazed at the creative ways that teachers have used the Fletcher books. We get sent the photos of science projects, art projects, reading literacy projects, and the great thing about Fletcher is that children can identify with him. I mean, he's full of questions, he's curious, he wonders about things, he's sort of nosy, inquisitive, just like children are really. So schools are trying to do more and more outdoor learning because, well, we're all very much aware of the importance of getting kids outside for their health and well-being, especially at this time. With the growth in outdoor learning and everything, children are often like really receptive when they're outdoors and exploring, and teachers are using Fletcher books as a springboard to, you know, all kinds of schemes of work and projects. And with the children that I teach in the class, we'll start reading the Fletcher story, and then that will lead on to other things, and we'll go outside and you know, explore and do, and in many ways do what we would be doing in the classroom, but outside of the classroom, which is actually a whole lot more fun. So teachers have just really inspire me as a teacher in what they have done with the books, and also as parents, carers, I think it's great to go out with your kids, and Fletcher's like a little companion to children, and they just seem to really love him.
In America, a lot of places, I think a lot of times it's national parks, and also a lot of libraries have done story trails where they take spreads from the Fletcher stories. So particularly Fletcher and the Falling Leaves and Fletcher and the Springtime Blossoms, I think are particularly well suited to the story trails. And they basically have the, you know, spreads from the book spread out along a sort of country walk with the, so when you're reading Fletcher and the Falling Leaves, you're walking through woodlands and swooshing through falling leaves and following the story as you go, which I think is just a lovely, you know, I wish they'd been around when my kids were small, so I think it would have been a lovely way to get the children outside and engaging with nature and engaging with stories at the same time, and, you know, just making that trip to the park a bit different. They've been in very different places. Some are in sort of urban parks where, you know, people maybe don't have much access to nature, whereas others are in country parks where it's very sort of wild and, you know, trekking through the hills. But I would love to have story walks over here as well. I think they are a lovely idea, so hopefully we'll get some over here.
Can you tell us about any future plans for Fletcher?
Well, the future plans for Fletcher, yeah, we're off onto the next 4 seasons, aren't we? So I think Tiphanie, I've been very busy at the moment because I've never actually been doing sort of 4 books at the same time before, but it's been really fun doing it. So yes, we've got what's the next, Fletcher and the Rainbow coming up this autumn. So we're going from the very small to the big, I think, on this one. We've got the teeny tiny caterpillar, and then the next story is about a rainbow. And that was a really lovely, fun, interesting one to write, actually, but I should probably not talk about that too much until we're doing the launch of Fletcher and the Rainbow. I'll save all my rainbow stories, but that was an interesting one to write. And then after that, we've got the summer story, Fletcher and the Rockfall, when he actually goes to the seaside. And that has worked out just beautiful because I used to have my seaside holidays on the North Norfolk coast. So the North Norfolk coast was very much in my mind when I was writing that one. And it turns out that Tiphanie actually comes from that area too. So when she's doing her illustrations, we're both very much in the same, we are just linked, aren't we, Tiphanie, basically? We're sort of perfect combination. And then the final one is Fletcher and the Stars, because when we were going around the seasons again, I was very aware of not wanting them to be too similar to the first books. So they all needed to have something that made them different from the seasons last time round. So obviously the summer one this time is at the seaside. So that's actually the only book that's in a completely different setting. The autumn books, it's about the rainbow. It's about the huge range of different sort of autumn colours, whereas Falling Leaves was very much about just the trees and the leaves. This one is about the whole range of all the different colours you get in the autumn. So it makes it a much, much more sort of colourful, different book. And then, yes, the stars. I had this idea for a stars story, but it's almost all set in the dark. And for a lot of it, there aren't even any stars, which I thought for an illustrator could be quite challenging. So before I went too far with it, I did talk to Tiphanie and say, how do you feel about a story set in the dark, and would it be impossible? And you leapt at it, didn't you, Tiphanie? You said you loved the idea, you got really excited, so I can't wait to see what you do with it.